I want to bring in now Aaron David Miller, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former Arab-Israeli negotiator for the State Department. Aaron, as always, it's great to talk to you. You just heard Richard's reporting from on the ground. What is the U.S. to do when, in fact, they're saying they're not imposing or dictating a timeline? These are merely suggestions. They want more targeted strikes in the next few weeks and not these broad strikes that we've been seeing from the Israeli military since October 7th. And yet Israel and the Israeli government does not necessarily seem receptive to that. Do they move to dictating or trying to impose more of a timeline? And if so, how do they do that?
First of all, Yasmin, thanks for having me. Look, I watched the U.S.-Israeli relations for a very long time, under Republican presidents, under Democratic presidents. And one reality is clear, and I think it's important to start there. No American president likes fighting with an Israeli prime minister privately, frankly, or certainly not publicly. It's messy, it's distracting, it's politically costly at times, and usually it's counterproductive. I think that's absolutely the case with Joe Biden, who alone among American presidents has this deep sensibility in regard and feeling for Israel. I don't see a major fracture or a breach here. I think the Israelis will make a virtue out of a necessity. Sometime in January, there will be a transition. I've watched very carefully and listened to what Jake Sullivan said in a very long interview with Israel's Channel 12. His remarks appear to say, I think he concluded by saying that the discussions ended in a, quote, good place. And yeah, I think there are differences over Israel's tactics and the day after. But I think the administration has a really great stake in not accentuating those differences, but in working with the Israelis in order to reach conclusions. Final point. I do think the Israelis will make a transition precisely to the kind of campaign that the administration is arguing for. But I also understand, and again, Jake Sullivan acknowledged it, and the president does so implicitly every time he talks about the subject. Israel's military activity in Gaza is going to go on for months at a much reduced level, because the objective that the president shares, he said it again in those remarks to his campaign, is to end Hamas's sovereignty in Gaza. I don't think there's any daylight between Israel and the U.S. on that issue.
So if you feel as if, Aaron, they're going to make this transition when it comes to the ground war, then what about the transition in thought when it comes to what happens the day after, which you and I have been talking about since the beginning of this conflict? And it seems as if there is some daylight when it comes to the day after, in that the United States has voiced wanting a two-state solution in the day after this conflict is over, with the Palestinian Authority eventually having authority over Gaza. Israel, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu's government does not seem on board with that. Do you foresee a transition to that thought within the Israeli government?
There's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, about what's going to happen in the day after, and then the day after the day after. And I think you're right. If there's a fight, if there are tensions, it's going to come not in the midst of this conflict, but it'll come relating to issues regarding, should the Palestinian Authority, weak and ineffectual as it is, can it be revitalized? Can the Israelis or anyone else trust Mahmoud Abbas or a future leader, basically to deal with radical elements within his own society? And it's going to come for sure on the issue of two states. And the administration, I think, is determined to make sure Gaza first is not Gaza only. It's going to be tethered to the pursuit of two states. Whether you can have a negotiation or not anytime soon, I very much doubt. But there will be a battle over this. And Mr. Netanyahu, ever conscious of his political predicament, on trial for fraud, breach of trust, and bribery in a Jerusalem district court, now 3 years in, could actually be convicted if he loses power. And I think he may choose to run, if in fact there is a campaign and an election, using his opposition to Palestinian statehood and perhaps his opposition to American support for that process as well. So I think the tensions will come, but I think they'll come at a later stage.
Interesting, some of the parallels that we're seeing here in this country, along with what could feasibly be happening in the future in Israel. Aaron David Miller for us, thank you. Appreciate it.